Hello and welcome to the podcast, Robotics Programs in Elementary School. This will be the first of 3 episodes of this podcast talking about robotics programs and why educators should have one at their school or district. Before we get started with this episode's topic, I want to quickly talk about why I've created this podcast since we are on the very first episode. When I was younger, I had the chance to experience robotics starting at a very young age. My overall experience was very positive, and I want every elementary student to have also the chance to have the opportunity to do robotics. Now, I'm not saying robotics is for everyone, but every student should at least have the chance to try it. With that being said, let's jump into the very first episode. What skills do students learn in robotics? Here with me today, I have a very special guest. He is a current SJSU student studying computer network systems management. He's an IT assistant for the student affairs and also coaches the high school robotics team in Los Altos. Please welcome to the podcast, Douglas McClure.
All right, thank you for having me.
So, how are you doing on this cooler day?
I'm doing good. I'm not excited for the heat that's about to come up, though.
I know that heat is brutal. Well, today is April 24th. It is currently 5:44 of the current recording of this podcast, and we are in the Martin Luther King Library using a nice study space for us to record this podcast. So I just want to thank MLK for letting us use the space. MLK Library. That being said, let's jump straight into the point, Douglas. The main topic, as mentioned before, is skills that students learn in robotics. Now, I'm going to ask you, just first off the bat, what is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the question, what skills do students learn in robotics?
I think for me, it's definitely project management. When you have to build a robot in such a short time frame, it is definitely just one of those things that I had to hurry up and learn what I needed to learn, do what I needed to do, and learn how to be that person that pushes towards the complete goal that the entire team's trying to achieve, which is to complete the robot.
So you're saying that not only have you seen the current Los Altos High School team do this, but you've actually done robotics before, is that right?
That's correct.
And this was in high school?
Yep.
And so when you were doing that project management, I guess what is the first thing that comes to mind when you are either teaching or having students do project management? What is kind of the first thing that students do?
So the first thing that students, well, they don't usually do this, but the first thing that students should do is figure out their timeline. So definitely learning how to organize themselves towards the start and being like, okay, at what points do we want certain parts done? What point do we want the CAD to be done? At what point do we want parts to start getting machined and then completed machine? And then at what point are we gonna finally hand it to the programmers so they can find to the robot before?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. But even before project management, I feel like the first thing that comes to mind in skills in robotics, and this is not even coming from me or from you. I feel like a lot of people think the first thing they think is STEM skills. STEM skills is I think is the first thing done. And I really enjoy that you actually go project management first because later down in the episode we're gonna talk about those other skills. But STEM skills I feel like is the first thing that we should probably talk about because when you approach someone, they go, I do robotics. Usually you go, oh, what engineering skills do you learn? Or what science skills do you learn? STEM, for ladies and gentlemen, and for folks watching, if you don't know, is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. More recently, has turned to STEAM, science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. And robotics programs definitely focus on those 4 things, right? And sometimes art, depending on if you're making your robot fancy and look good and whatnot, which is absolutely depending on the competition, depending on what project you are doing, which is okay. But STEM is 100% kind of, you know, it's up there. And when people go out and do STEM, it doesn't have to be in robotics, which can be an issue when you're trying to convince someone that you want to run an after-school robotics program. For example, I watched a documentary by Alexander Street. He is a person who goes around and makes educational documentaries, and he went to a school who has a STEM curriculum incorporated within their school already, which is super cool. So they do a lot of science in their classroom, and they actually have worked with a little bit of engineering process in their classroom. So you might be wondering, STEM is great, and it's already incorporated out there. I also said that there's in San Jose, even in San Jose, we have science camp and technology camp, working with technology. I mean, MLK does some stuff. You can rent out technology and learn how to use that there. So, Douglas, I'm gonna have to ask you, how do you feel that even though there are all these STEM programs, what do you think makes robotics programs different from these other STEM programs?
Hmm, that's a pretty interesting question. I feel like the thing that makes robotics programs different is, I guess, the fact that it's more hands-on.
Mm.
When you think of like the STEM camps, and especially when you think of minor robotics camps, you think of like little kit robots that they make you do, and those are only so advanced. And you also already given the beginning and the end of it. For robotics programs, you have to do everything completely from scratch. The fact that you only get the premise of whatever task you need to do, and then at the end of the competition, you end up with something that you completely made just from ground zero is absolutely inspiring.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with certain engineering, like with certain already camps, that it's somewhat the same process every time. Every year they kind of recycle either the same kit, whether it being like how to build like a basic computer and things like that. I absolutely agree. Episode two, listeners, is where we really get into the nuts and bolts of what you expect in a robotics program, what you build, which is what Douglas is talking about. So look forward to that episode, and I really hope that you do get to learn something about it. And you're absolutely right. In the programs that I mentioned in episode two, the task is almost every year is different, and they make it more engaging and more fun every time, and then they improve upon the previous year, which is really great. And yeah, so episode two will definitely be diving into those certain robotics programs and curriculum and whatnot. But Douglas, I want to go over a term: educational robotics. Educational robotics was a term defined by Angel Fernandez in a case study he wrote about robotics programs in schooling. And educational robotics is something that means it means that like not only do students learn how to build a robot, STEM wise, but they're also learning the process to getting to that robot.
Mm.
And one of those terms you mentioned is project management. Like project management is, yes, you can learn that somewhere else, but the fact that students can learn it while doing robotics is super cool. And so, yes, what I'm saying is STEM is absolutely skills that students will learn in robotics. That is a no brainer. Everyone knows that. Even people who aren't in robotics or engineering or any of that know that. But educational robotics. Now that you know what this term means, what is that? What are your first thoughts?
The first thoughts are definitely, yeah, as you pointed out, points of project management. But I also think about it gives students room to fail, and
Mm,
you always learn through failure.
yes, yeah. Failure is 100% uh, an important thing about robotics. And what I really like about how you said about failure is when students fail a question or a test or something like that, it makes them feel awful. It makes them feel unmotivated. Makes them feel like they can't do it again, which is really bad. But in robotics programs, when your robot fails, it's a robot. It's not your grade. Students might feel motivated to fix it, recode it, rebuild it, to then fix their failure and make a successful robot. And that is a skill, education or robotics, that you can use, that students can use in school. Hopefully, the teacher lets them. Where a student might fail a math problem. Let's use math as an example. A student might fail a math problem, how to do, let's say, long division, right? And they fill out a certain step, and then the next time a worksheet or a test comes around, the teacher puts a similar long division problem on that sheet. Now, when the student takes that and does the problem again, they remember their failure, and they remember that they took some teacher advice, they redid the problem, and now on this test they know how to do it. And it's just a wonderful piece of work that students can learn in robotics. And yes, I will say this time and time again, they can learn this somewhere else, but it's just showing that you can learn it in robotics too. So as my someone I look up to, my mentor from high school, his name is Michael Corsetto. I'll put a picture on the screen. His number one thing he always told me was fail faster to succeed sooner. And I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. And you met Mike before. He's a
Yep,
pretty cool guy, right?
pretty cool.
Pretty cool guy. All right. What is another skill that you might think of for educational robotics?
Another skill. I mean, thinking of educational robotics, I also think of like soft skills. Uh, Collaboration, I believe, is one of
Mm,
them. Just because you do have to work with so many different students and that are from so many different backgrounds, it sort of opens your eyes towards like other noticing what other people, the way they think, the way that they act, and then just thinking of other processes that you may or may not take inspiration from, and then sort of applying into your own life. Wow.
Absolutely. I have collaboration written down, so good job. Collaboration, 100%. I mean, when you're building a robot, you can't do it by yourself, which is okay because robots are complicated. I mean, have you seen the robot Boston Dynamics of building? That's crazy. But absolutely, collaboration. I'm a big fan of peer-to-peer learning and peer-to-peer helping out, group work, working together, collaboration, and robotics 100% works with that. Up in the higher levels of high school, I know this podcast is supposed to be meant for elementary schoolers, but when students are building these 150-pound robots, they can't do it by themselves. They need to collaborate. And the number one thing about collaboration is not only are you getting the manpower to build it, but you're also learning about each other and getting and learning different skills from each other. Every student is different, and every student should be different because that's just who they are, their identity, their skills, and whatnot. But what's important is students are learning from each other. And I think that collaboration plays a huge part, which also goes into communication work. Communication, whether it be between your teammates or your instructor, I think communication sometimes for students is hard to learn in the classroom, especially in very traditional classrooms where teachers just kind of present to you, teach you how to do a certain thing, and then you do the work. It can be hard. So learning how to communicate with your instructor, not being afraid to ask questions. It's okay to not know the answer. It's okay to not know how to do a certain step, and young students can really get that opportunity in robotics programs to really, really learn that because they're not going to know everything because it's robotics. It's a very, very, off standard subject for schools. So I think communication is actually super important for young students. And when we're speaking from a K first grade all the way up to a fifth, sixth grade level, it can be from a fifth grade level where they're communicating on how to do certain technical skill, all the way to a first grade level where they're just asking, "Hey, what's our next step?" I think one thing that's really important in terms of classroom environment is students knowing what to do next. I feel like what can cause a lot of chaos in classrooms is the teacher tries to transition to the next step, and then the students lose their step, and then it just becomes mad chaos. So robotics programs can really help students again with that collaboration and communication setting. Do you have any other educational robotics terms that or things that the kids might learn on the process of building to a robot?
Yeah, the one that I definitely ended up thinking of as you're talking about communication is their social skills.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, going back to the collaboration, communication, especially when you need to talk to your teachers, your instructors, and mentors. And it comes to that time where you need to ask them to buy like this new technology.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard for students of any age to be like, "Hey, can we get this $350 camera for the robot?" Or it's like, "Oh yeah, we need more belts." Possibly like a week before, just because the CAD got finished a little bit late. There's definitely just a few that like students that are new to robotics will not know how to ask that without feeling either terrible or absolutely terrified.
The good thing is in the elementary programs, all the materials should already be there. Which is again, speaking the second episode, which can be a long episode, longer than this one for sure. But I have to agree, yeah, communication, knowing how to talk with your teacher is really important. And I feel like a lot of students sometimes can see teacher as an intimidating figure, which I mean, becoming a future educator myself, I hope that my students don't fear me. I want to have a safe, positive classroom environment that's engaging. In order for students to engage, they need to know how to, ask me questions and things like that. And robotics programs and go to the social ability. I feel like sometimes students do struggle to make friends, which is it could be many reasons. Maybe they are just introverted, or maybe they just moved here. And this can go with any after school program, any club. Students just being able to talk in a maybe a smaller setting, not in a classroom of 30 students, maybe in a club of 10 students working on a robot. They can find their footing and make some really great friends for the future. And having a social life does help students in school. People say like people kids don't need friends. They can just study or whatever. No, in elementary school, kids need friends. And a robotics program can definitely provide that space of that positive learning environment, learning something new, robotics, and then creating new friends, whether it be through icebreakers or just hanging out with them enough at the after school program.
Yeah, and I've definitely seen examples of that. I've seen myself start with people that I barely know, and then we just became good friends after. I've seen students in Los Altos Robotics start up as complete strangers, and then as the season went on, you see them get closer and closer, and it's definitely
Yeah.
just amazing.
Especially in elementary school when I was in my program, my friend, when I joined his team, there were some people I didn't know, but you all want to do good. You all want to build a good robot. In order to build a good robot, you all want to be on the same track, on the same pathway. You all want to make sure that there's no confusion on where the robot needs to go and how you want to build it. And you need to communicate. You need to talk to your peers and become friends with them if you want to create a final project that you're satisfied with, whether it be in high school, 150-pound, 6 foot tall robots, or even elementary school, Lego Mindstorms. Again, more programs that we'll talk about in the second episode. Um, but yeah, just peer to peer learning is just so big in terms of social skills, communication skills, and collaborative skills. Yeah, I was actually thinking of one more thing is not really related to kind of like the growing of a person, but skills that they could use in school. I think is also something you can learn in robotics that might be harder for students to learn in a classroom. One of them, not really something that students need to learn in maybe first to fourth grade, but especially fifth and sixth grade when they start getting more writing skills, is research skills. Research skills I feel like is really important, and a lot of students can think of like when they hear research, they think of just oh my god, we're writing writing. But in robotics, when you're researching on other like on how other people have designed things and how other people built robots. Um, because in robotics, there's absolutely no shame in I guess not stealing a design, but looking at design and getting inspiration from it. I think research skills is one important thing in robotics that students can use in schooling when they grow up, whether it be early on in fifth or sixth grade, or even when they become middle schoolers and high schoolers, or even when they need to write college level papers. I think research skills is something that robotics can provide. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. The first thing I think that comes to mind is another one of Mike Rossetto's quotes.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, take from the best and but the rest.
correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
he always says that because he is a very competitive man and he likes to win. And he's also an engineer. And I've seen some things see where he's talking about something for the robot, and he goes, "Hey, look at this like stair climber, for example. Like, look how they do it. Maybe we can implement that in our robot." And it's not going to be the exact same stair climber because every robot is different, just like how every student is different. But it's sort of something where instead of trying to invent your own stair climber, which would be cool.
Mhm.
When you're a student and you're thinking of a billion things to build your robot, getting some inspiration is really important. And I think when it comes to research, learning the ways to get that information is really important. And some people struggle with research all the way, even up the way until college. They spend hours and hours upon research. I remember researching for this exact project. I was taking a little bit too much time, and then my professor was like, "Hey, here's this resource. Type in the keywords," and I literally found some really good resources, like the one about educational robotics on the case study. Um, and yeah, that's just more educational robotic skills that students can learn when having an after school robotics program. And yeah, I just again the robotics programs they're great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah. Definitely. I've seen the research skills like increase in over time. Right now, there's just students that know almost every single game just because if they're in the program for enough years, they kind of see the similarities between one game and another. So if there's a shooting game, then they look at all the shooting games, like, okay, which ones seem the most similar? Which mechanisms from these years can we
Mhm.
sort of take and then revamp for whatever the new game is?
Yeah. Again, games, yearly games, all programs that we talked about next episode, and I absolutely agree. Just students finding patterns, and finding patterns is important in almost most subjects. Students really connecting the dots with certain lessons and certain histories and things like that. There's so many just applications of the robotics program students can use in school, which is such a big factor of getting a robotics program at the district or at the site. So yeah, Douglas, thank you so much
Of course.
for being on this podcast. This is gonna wrap up episode one of robotics of elementary students of sorry of robotics programs in elementary schools. Again, education in robotics, it's much more than STEM. Skills you learn in robotics, absolutely huge. And I want to say thank you again for Douglas McClure for giving us the equipment to record this podcast. Thank you, Martin Luther King Library here at San Jose State University for letting us use the space. And I want you guys to watch episode two about programs and curriculums, which is going to be a big part of convincing faculty to let you run a robotics program. You know, really getting the knowledge of how to run one, as well as episode three, where we actually talked to some students about are robotics students too young to learn, are elementary students too young to learn robotics, which is going to be a really fun conversation with students themselves. So yeah, I'm going to have to say thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the series.